Hi everyone, my name's Tom. Thanks for all coming out on this rainy day. We've got Cheesemonger here of New Curds on the Block. So that's the real reason you came. I'd also like to make an announcement. The Bethel Public Library received a grant from the AARP Community Challenge group, and we now have a adaptive audio system. So if any of you need any assistance in hearing adaptation, it's downloadable to an app, and you can stream it the sound right through your phone to a set of earbuds or Bluetooth, what have you, and it's tied right in. It's a great system, and we're very happy for AARP to provide that for us. I'd also like to say that December 19th, we have the Chamber, the Bethel High School Chamber Group coming. They're going to do holiday songs, so come on out for that. We'll also be broadcasting it on our Zoom, so if you can't come down in person for some reason, they'll be here. So now, as I said, this is Kate Redin, the owner of New Curds on the Block Cheese Shop in Oakville, Connecticut. She's an expert in New England cheeses and sources all of her product directly from farms and cheese makers across the Northeast. Kate received her master's in food studies from the American University of Rome, during which time she studied the intersection of food and art in rural communities. She holds a certification from the Institute of Sustainable Nutrition in Granby, Connecticut, with a focus on soil health, human nutrition, and kitchen medicine. She learned about cheese while working behind the counters at Greenwich Cheese Company in Cobb, Connecticut, Saxelby Cheesemongers in New York City. Kate runs her Oakville store alongside her husband, Zach, a fishmonger at To the Gills. Without further ado.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you all for being here tonight. Do you folks in the back need cheese? Do you need boxes? Yes, good. I want to make sure everyone's set up. So yeah, he said it all. I'm done. Now we can just eat cheese. There's nothing more you need to know about me. My shop is in Watertown, Connecticut, Oakville, a neighborhood of Watertown. Tomorrow is our 2-year anniversary of the shop opening. So that is like so exciting. It's really fun to be here and to get to introduce a new part of the state to what we do if you've not heard of us. So I specialize in New England cheeses. You come to my shop and my cheese case is all full of cheeses from the region. I'm knowledgeable and trained on global cheese styles, but because I live in Connecticut, I focus on cheeses from here. I don't use a distributor. I buy direct from all of my producers, and that allows me to really have a relationship with the people I'm buying from, to know what their needs are. If they have some funny looking wheels that they need to sell, they're just sitting there. If they have something that's tasting really amazing and they haven't found a market for, I've sort of positioned myself as that person that they call when they need to move really fun, interesting things. And my customers have become accustomed to that. They know that every time they come in, I'll have something different. And if I don't have exactly what they're looking for, I'll be able to monger them into the direction of finding something I think they'll like. So I thought tonight it would be fun to kind of on the eve of the holiday season, give you a little overview of different styles of cheese, give you an opportunity to taste 5 different styles of cheese, all from New England, and talk a little bit about, how to curate a cheese selection if you're having people over, and how to shop from a cheesemonger. Because that's really what I want to communicate is that it's not scary to come and talk to a person behind a counter and when you buy your cheese, and you'll get like a really high quality product doing it that way. So let's start by opening up our little cheese boxes. You all should have a box in front of you. If you don't, give me a holler. And I'm sorry for the folks at home that don't have cheese and have to live vicariously. But hopefully I'll pique your interest and you'll come visit me. I've given us each 5 cheeses, and we're going to go through them in a specific order. I also included a little wooden fork in the top of the lid, and I forgot napkins. I apologize. But if we get desperate, I know there's paper towels and things we can grab. So I want to start just by briefly just kind of defining what a cheesemonger is. A monger, a fishmonger, a cheesemonger is essentially an expert purveyor in a specific discipline, in a specific product. So as a cheesemonger, my knowledge comes from the relationships I have with my cheesemakers. And so you come to me and I'm not the cheesemaker and I'm not the farm, but I am the knowledgeable middleman, basically. So you can come and you can talk to me and I speak on behalf of the makers about process, about aging, about ingredients, about how to best serve it and pair it and enjoy it. It's sort of like a cheese sommelier. There is like certification and designations you can get as a cheesemonger, but I think framing it as a sommelier is nice because we have an understanding of like how to talk about wine and how to serve it and how to pair it. And there are cheesemongers in the world that are trained to do that specifically with cheese. So that's the experience you get shopping from a monger. I joke that, I I have a little cheese counter, everything's in glass and refrigerated. And in order to buy cheese, you have to talk to me or you have to talk to whoever's behind the counter. And right now, this day and age, you can go to the grocery store and you can have your headphones in and you can grab your things. You can go and check yourself out. You don't have to speak to another human being. But mongers are sort of creating a renaissance of having a customer facing, interaction with a really knowledgeable person. So that's what my husband and I strive to do with our shop. Great. Any questions about mongering? We can keep it open too if things come up. I've sort of outlined on this first half of the sheet, the front side with the colorful color wheel, rather a flavor wheel. I like talking about cheese in a couple of different styles. There's some different schools of thought on how to describe cheese style, but the way I've outlined it is fresh, bloomy, washed, semi-firm, hard, and blue. And some of those I'm sure you know, and some of them maybe you have questions about. So we'll get to talk about and explore and taste each one along the way. You can also describe cheese based on milk type. Most common in the States, we find cow's milk cheeses. Cow's milk cheeses are pretty ubiquitous. The two main other milk types in this country would be goat and sheep. Sheep's milk cheeses include Pecorino Romano, Manchego, a lot of like Spanish and Italian cheeses. There are some people in the States who dairy sheep, who raise sheep for dairying, but it's actually really difficult to find, especially in the Northeast. I struggle to get sheep's cheeses in. Sheep are difficult. Cows produce much more milk for much less effort. I also listed buffalo milk, mozzarella di bufala. You can get buffalo milk cheeses. Camel, if it's a mammal, someone in the world has tried to make cheese. So if you look at the origins of cheese making, a lot of that kind of fermenting milk and into a preserved product into cheese started in the Middle East, started in Mongolia and Eurasia. So there's lots and lots of varieties of cheese. But yeah, when you see a cheese and you're describing it, style is a really nice way to start, and then milk type. And this is also useful for discovering what you like. I find a lot of folks come in and they say, I know I love this and I hate this. Great, I can work with that. And I can help kind of triangulate something that I think you'll enjoy based on knowing if you like, if you really love Manchego, but you're not so sure about fresh goat cheese. We can, find something right in the middle. Why don't we start with our first cheese? So the way I have it laid out, your box may have been jostled in transport, but there should be 3 cheeses along the top, left to right. There's a round little container of fresh cheese, and then a little white triangle, and then a little orange square. And then along the bottom, there's a bright yellow one, and then a blue in the bottom right corner. So that's the order we're gonna go. We're gonna start with that little souffle cup. And this first cheese is a fresh cheese. On the back of your form has a list of all the cheeses and the origin and the milk type and the style, if that's a useful guide as well. So this first cheese isn't something you'd necessarily think of putting on a cheese board or like serving at a party, but it's a fresh ricotta. It's a really nice illustration of what a fresh cheese is because it's basically cultured milk. It's really simple. There's no aging done to it, meaning like it has no rind. It's really soft and creamy. Fresh cheeses tend to be really like sweet cream, ice cream, buttery flavor, soft and spreadable, high moisture. So anything that's going to be kind of like soft and smooshy. Also in the fresh cheese category, you could include like a fresh chèvre. You could include feta, like a crumbly feta in brine, halloumi and paneer. I would even consider yogurt, maybe even in the fresh category as like a fresh cultured dairy product. Fresh cheeses also tends to be the highest in lactose. So if you have difficulty digesting lactose, maybe skip the the fresh, really creamy cheeses and go for something a little more aged. This fresh ricotta is from Liuzzi Cheese in Hamden. They are a fifth generation Italian American cheese producer in Hamden. It's been in the family since they opened, and they specialize in fresh Italian style cheeses. So they do ricotta, they do burrata, they do mozzarella, buratini, all the every little size and shape of fresh pasta filata cheese you can picture. Pasta filata is the like stretched curd cheeses. So mozzarella, they start by like stretching in hot water and getting that really nice, soft, meltable texture. And they source their milk from a cooperative of New England dairies. So all the milk is coming from the region and being made in Connecticut. They're a pretty large producer for the folks that I buy from. They're one of the larger scale, but still like high attention to quality. They basically make cheese to order. Every week when I order, they say, you have to let me know by Monday or we're not going to make you burrata. So it's pretty awesome. I mean, I'm a small shop, but in the summertime, you can't give mozzarella and burrata away at the farmer's market. So it's, yeah. What do you think of the ricotta? It tastes like ice cream. They make a couple different styles of ricotta. This is the old fashioned, they call it old fashioned ricotta. They make one called fino, which is a little more almost like creamy, like a mascarpone. This has a nice curd to it. Like if you sort of like roll it around the top of your mouth, it has a little texture to it. It's soft and creamy, but it has a little bite to it. And I agree, it's just like so fresh, and yeah, nothing wrong with that. So that's a great cheese for adding into dishes if you're cooking, or this with a really simple like fig jam or honey and some crusty bread. That's a summer and fall favorite for me. Yeah. So that's a fresh cheese. Yes, sir. They're all whole milk. Yep. Full fat, whole milk cheeses. Yeah. Yes. Tastes like Arthur Avenue. Oh, I love that. Right? Oh my gosh. There's nothing better. There's nothing better. I had someone recently ask me about the word ricotta too, because it comes from the Italian to re-cook, or to cook twice, ricotta. And real deal traditional ricotta is really technically called whey ricotta, where a cheesemaker, let's say for example, is making pecorino romano. They acidify their milk, they separate it into curds and whey, which is the beginning of any cheese making. Little Miss Muffet taught us that. There's curds and there's whey. The whey is essentially a waste product that usually gets fed to pigs. In Parma, it gets fed to the prosciutto, the pigs that will then become prosciutto di Parma, which is kind of a neat cycle between the cheesemaking and the cured meat industry. Or farmers use it as fertilizer, or it gets dumped. But with ricotta, they would take the whey and re-boil it, and there are still milk solids in that whey that separate to the top, and you get this like really cream of the crop, really soft, flavorful ricotta. That is pretty labor intensive, so it's not what most commercial ricotta is in the States. But if you ever try home cheese making and you have whey left over, definitely look into ricotta-ing it to see if you can get a little more extra cheese out of there. Yeah. Sweet. All right. Moving to the right, our second cheese is going to be a little white triangle, super white, with some dark coloration around it. This is called Lake's Edge. It is an ash ripened goat's milk cheese. If you think you don't like goat cheeses, try this. Try a little bit. This is a cheese from Blue Ledge Farm in Vermont. They're a goat dairy, and they're going to be our first example of the rest of these makers, which are farmstead cheesemakers. A farmstead cheesemaker is someone that raises their animals, milk their animals, and makes the cheese all in one location. So that's really special. That is the hardest possible way to make cheese. And we have a lot of farmstead cheesemakers in Connecticut and in New England, and a long history of that, which is very exciting. So this is in the bloomy category. Bloomy rinded cheeses, I made sure that everybody got a piece with some rind on it. So on like the pizza crust side of the triangle is the cheese rind. Cheese rind is essentially just the part of the cheese that's been exposed to oxygen as the cheese has been aging. So ricotta isn't aged at all. They make it, they pack it, it's fresh, you send it out the door. A cheese like this ages for about like 30 to 45 days. It's a pretty young cheese. It's still in the center, has that like really fresh chèvre, fresh goat cheese texture, almost like you'd get on like a goat cheese salad. But around the rind, you get a little more brie, a little more brie-like flavors, a little more complexity, a little funk, and that powdery outside is called a bloomy rind. So bloomy rinded cheeses include camembert, they include brie. Um, Definitely taste the rind on all the cheeses tonight. I definitely recommend you taste the rind. It's sort of like the crust on a sandwich. Some people don't like it, but it's a little different flavor. It's a little different texture. It's all safe to eat. And I definitely recommend you, eat that brie rind if you learn nothing else tonight. If you want a cup of pudding, go get a cup of pudding, but eat the rind on a brie. Yes. Yes. So this cheese, in addition to having that white bloomy rind, there's vegetable ash on it and through it. And the vegetable ash is essentially like a charcoal dust, like an activated vegetable charcoal. And that's an old French cheese making technique that sort of predates like when a family would have a family cow, one cow for the family, they'd milk it twice a day. And there was no saran wrap and no Tupperware. So they would do the first milking and then they'd throw some ash from the fireplace on top of the milk, on this kind of skim of the milk to keep undesirables from falling into it. And then the second milking of the day, they'd put on top. And so a lot of these French style cheeses, specifically goat's milk cheeses, tend to have this done to them, but can have this really beautiful, stark use of vegetable ash that sort of creates a gorgeous, like, I call it kind of an aesthetic relic of something that used to be really practical and now is just like kind of beautiful. There's a cheese from California called Humboldt Fog, which is pretty widely available that maybe you've seen, that has, it looks like a big slice of birthday cake with a line of dark ash through the middle. And that's a goat's milk brie with that nice, beautiful ash. The ash doesn't really impart too much flavor, but it does affect the chemistry on the rind as the cheese is aging. So it does actually play a role in sort of making the cheese rind a little more basic than acidic, which invites certain microflora and bacteria that love that sort of thing and rejects other things that maybe prefer a more acidic environment. So you get like a really specific development of flavors and textures when ash is used. Yeah. Yes. Oh, sorry. You think so? This one? Oh, I love ricotta salata. It can have that sort of funk, that little like depth of funk to it. It sounds like we're taking a field trip to Arthur Avenue. I like this. What was your question? Mm. I love that question. And that actually takes me back to the front half of the page. Principles of pairing. So when I'm thinking about what to pair something with, if you come in, you chat with me, you have the opportunity to taste cheeses before you buy them. I like thinking about pairing as either doing like with like or that opposites attract. So for something like this, I would call this pretty like tangy and acidic. It has a nice sharpness to it. It's really creamy. I think like a sweet pairing is super nice with this. Dried apricots, stone fruit, jam, fig jam, honey. I like a sweet pairing with this. A cracker with a little dried fruit in it. It's also killer with like a prosciutto or a cured salami or something kind of buttery and salty that can kind of play with the acidity nicely. But I like the opposites attract mentality for this one. I think works really nicely. Yeah, of course. So when you're tasting cheeses, like pulling out, if you're like, ooh, this tastes kind of nutty, it might pair really nicely with almonds. Like you can do literally one for one. Like I'm tasting fruitiness in this. I'm going to pair it with a strawberry. Or as we get down to the end of the list, like a really classic opposites attract pairing is Stilton and port, like a really strong, salty, savory blue with a sweet red wine or like a dessert wine. So that's a nice, like salty sweet. And I'm Sicilian, so I like the salty sweet. All right, moving into our next cheese. Crema Alpina is that orange rinded, really gooey, hopefully like perfectly warmed up to room temperature. You might need your fork for this one. And this is a washed rind cheese. I heard someone in the beginning say, what's washed? Washed rind cheeses are fun. Washed rinds are considered stinky cheeses. I brought you a very elementary level stinker, but there's some funkiness on this rind. If you like explore this cheese a little bit, give it a smell, give it a taste, that orange tacky rind is a really nice indicator that we're in washed rind territory. Washed rind cheeses start out similar to the bloomies. Bloomy rinded cheeses have, you know what? I didn't talk about bloomies enough, actually. Let me say one more thing about them. Under a microscope, the name comes from the way that the mold on the cheese kind of blooms on the rind as it's aging, which is kind of beautiful. And also under a microscope, the specific mold that's used for most bries and camemberts looks like little flowers. It like looks like little flowers under the microscope. So that's kind of neat. Bloomy rinded cheeses and washed rinds often start from the same place where you have a batch of fresh curd that gets inoculated with cultures. It basically gets cultured with like really good beneficial bacteria that A, makes it more easier to digest, and also imparts flavor and texture as the cheese ages. As a cheese ages, essentially all that means aging is like, how do I describe it? It's like intentional neglect. You to age a cheese, you put it someplace and you forget about it for a little while. And how long you forget about it, the temperature of the room, the humidity, the ventilation, all of that kind of dictates what the final cheese ends up looking like. But it's sort of just leaving it alone for a while. Yes, like a dry cured or an dry aged beef. And any exposed area of cheese. So a baby wheel of cheese basically looks like an unfrosted birthday cake. You have this like little fresh baby. And as it sits and ages in temperature and humidity, the rind starts to develop. And what that means is basically the mold that is in the cheese, the yeasts, the bacteria, all the mold is a scary word, but it's all the good stuff that creates the cheese, texture and flavor that we love, start to come out onto that rind. And the bloomy rinded cheeses get that really nice powdery, white, snowy rind that you associate maybe with like a brie or a camembert. A washed rind cheese, the cheesemaker then comes along with a salt brine or maybe a beer or a cider and physically like washes the cheese as it's aging. They flip the wheels, they wash it down with a salt brine and a little brush. And that imparts a ton of salinity, usually from salt, and moisture on the cheese as it's aging. And that creates an environment where certain funky bacteria love to come and play. And that's where you get the stinky foot, the gym sock, the sort of maybe like, if you love it, you love it. And if you don't, you're like, oh my gosh. These cheeses tend to go from like buttery to really savory. I almost describe the crema alpina as sometimes tasting kind of porky, like it's almost like a rich, fatty prosciutto. Like it has a really nice savory note. This with dry cured salami, this is a like with like for me. I like the like salty savory with the salty and savory. Do a dry cured salami, do like a savory cracker with some herbs in it. And this has like a really nice soft spreadable gooey texture too. What do you think of the crema? Isn't that awesome? It's really nice. Yes. Mhm. And then it appears out of nowhere. Yes. That's okay. Scrape it off. Scrape it off. It's most likely, depending on the status of your fridge, coming from the cheese. You may buy a piece of cheese. Everything I gave you tonight has rind on it because that's how I sell the cheese. It comes with rind. I cut it with rind. It would be sort of like having a pizza and me cutting like a piece out of the middle and just giving you the middle. Cheese shops do that and commercial cheesemakers do that. Or they're, cryovac cheeses that don't have a rind, like you think of like a block of Cabot cheddar or something like that. But all those cheeses have cultures in them, and the cultures are going to manifest if it's a high moisture environment. If you, for example, put a piece of cheddar in a Ziploc bag, it basically creates a greenhouse. You'll notice it gets sweaty. There's, water coming out of the cheese. And that creates an environment where those totally happy, tasty cultures that make the cheese nutty and delicious come out to play and don't look so great. But for most situations, scrape it off, cut it off, cut a good, 1/8 of an inch off the cheese. I condone scraping and going forth. The only time it gets a little squirrely is if it's really, really wet. If you take something out and you have a Tupperware and it was a cheddar and now it looks like a brie. I mean, trust your nose too. Smell it, right? Like you can trust yourself. But hear me in your head being like, it would be okay if it was a $30 a pound cheese if I scraped a little off. And yes, I saw your hand first. Do you have a question? Yes. Hit me. Mm, yes. This is a pretty young cheese, and by young standards, I say like probably a month, 3 weeks to a month. Um, an interesting fact about cheeses in America, um, cheeses you've made with raw milk. We'll get a couple raw milk cheeses in the tasting tonight. Um, cheeses made with raw milk have to be aged for over 60 days. So it's going to be very unlikely that you find, for example, a camembert or a feta or a ricotta or anything really soft and fresh or in the bloomy and washed category that is made with raw milk. So that's kind of I don't know if that's useful or not, but that's sort of an interesting factoid. You go to Europe and you have beautiful, flavorful raw milk camemberts and things like that. But one way to kind of guess age is if it's gooey and runny like a brie or really soft and creamy like that fresh cheese we first had, it's probably like under a month old, I would guess. Yeah. Yes. Sure. Yeah. A lot of folks have questions about cheese storage because you go and you buy something nice and then it ends up languishing in your fridge or in your cheese drawer. So I brought things to sell tonight. So I'm going to show you as an example. I wrap my cheeses in a little like semi-wax cheese paper. Um, I recommend for aged cheeses, anything kind of firm that you could like slice your knife through. Um, bring it home how I gave it to you, wrapped in the paper, take it out, eat whatever you want, and then rewrap it in this paper. The paper allows for moisture to escape. The way that cheese goes bad is one, if the moisture is trapped in, for example, like a Ziploc bag or a Tupperware, that's gonna get soggy and not good moldy, like scary moldy. And not like make you sick, die scary, but like undesirable, gonna have to chuck it moldy. Wrapped in paper like this, all that's gonna happen to this cheese, if I put it in my fridge for a month, is it's gonna dry out. It's sort of gonna petrify. It's gonna age. It's gonna dry age. Like it is not gonna. It'll kind of slowly decline in like quality and flavor over time. But if I find a little piece in the back of my fridge, I call them the nubbins. I always have some nubbins kicking around. They're great for grating into a bechamel for a mac and cheese or into throw it into a soup stock or like those little hard petrified pieces can sometimes be nice grated onto things and they're still good eats if not like the most perfect beautiful version of that cheese. So I say wax paper or parchment paper. Reuse what your cheesemonger gives you if you're going to a fancy cheesemonger, or use parchment paper or wax paper. Sometimes even wrapping tight in plastic is perfect. It keeps the moisture in so it doesn't dry out, but it doesn't allow for that kind of greenhouse effect of like picturing like water droplets developing in a Tupperware. That's usually kind of a sad environment for a cheese. So for fresh, softer, younger cheeses are going to have a shorter shelf life. So something like ricotta, for example, will go bad. You'll see, if you see color in ricotta, ditch it. Yellow, blue, red, you don't want that. Green, heaven forbid, that's less ideal. That's really souring. Something like the bries as well, cheese is alive, and so it's going to continue developing and aging really even after you take it home. And it really comes down to personal taste. Some people love when, I mean, there's some pretty undesirable sounding tasting notes on this sheet, but catty, not like the attitude, like the cat box. Like there's an ammonia character that comes from certain really aged cheeses. Some people love that, some people love it in small doses. And so the softer, gooey bries and fresh cheeses, I say, if possible, buy them in small amounts and enjoy them. Enjoy them. Eat them sooner rather than later. Use them in recipes if you have leftovers. And then the more aged cheeses really they have a nice long shelf life. They can hold up, and they may change. They may get a little more hard and desiccated, but cut that outside layer off. If you see a little bloom of mold, that's okay. Cut it off and carry on. Yes. Yeah, the brie, I would say, if you buy like a pre-cut wedge of brie at the grocery store, or even like a little wheel, sometimes it comes in like a white kind of like cheese paper. Reuse that paper. That's free paper. I really recommend like wrap it tight, and reuse the paper that it came in, or use like a parchment or a waxed paper for those softies. Yeah. Yes. Ooh. Most cheese has mold in it, but we just don't see it. Is not something most people like to hear. But blue cheese has like a very visual, like, oh, like you see it. You see that color, and we know, we're educated that like, oh, that is mold. There are cultures on the rinds and in the paste of all of the cheeses that you're trying today. So really all it is I describe like, let's just put our eyes on the next cheese, actually, that little bright yellow piece on the bottom left. I'm going to use that as an example. I am still on your question, I promise. It sounds like I'm on a tangent, but cheese has the anatomy of cheese has two parts. There's rind and paste. The rind we've been talking about, it's that outside kind of crusty layer. And then the paste is the rest of the cheese. That's what we're all accustomed to eating. Sometimes if you have a piece, like let's say you had that little piece of cheese in your fridge and you find that there's mold on the paste, that's usually what will happen. Is it'll sort of bloom. Mold comes from someplace. It's probably coming from the rind, or even just within the recipe of the cheese. And that's where it's basically just physically manifesting, because it's usually been like stored or kept in, less than ideal conditions. Does that make sense? Yes. Mm, yeah. Yes, safe to eat, maybe not the most desirable. So in a similar vein, actually, to what we were just asked about, once a cheese is cut into, I use the example of like an avocado. You have an avocado, you cut it in half, now you have two pieces of avocado. And if you leave one of those sides out, you notice that bright green start to kind of oxidize and get dark and get dry. The color changes, the texture changes. It's not bad, but it's not your delicious fresh avocado. Cheese is the same. A whole wheel of cheese is pretty content to sort of age and stay as it is. But as soon as a cheesemonger cuts into it, or if you have like a little piece of brie at home, and as soon as you cut into it, the timeline sort of accelerates, where it gets not so happy anymore. So even like really reputable cheese counters in this area that carry great, great cheeses, if you're buying pre-cut cheese that's wrapped and ready and priced and weighed at the grocery store, it's difficult to tell, even if you're educated like I am, what you're looking at, how long it's been cut. And essentially it's degrading in quality since the moment when it got cut and wrapped to when someone takes it home. So there are some visual cues you can look for with a brie. You really want that like very fresh white snow looking rind, not a lot of moisture built up. Sometimes I see brie in the grocery store and I'm like, oh no, it's almost like you've overwatered the garden. It just looks kind of sad. It doesn't look bright and fluffy and healthy. It looks kind of soggy. I've known people to, smell things at the grocery store. That's allowed too. You can definitely learn a lot by smelling a cheese. But yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky. Unless you have the privilege of like going to a person and tasting it and having me cut it fresh for you, it's tough to buy those like softer cheeses, because it is sometimes a gamble. And usually if you get that really ammoniated smell and flavor, it is because I would say it's a little on its way out. Yeah. Something else a cheesemonger can do for you is I'll occasionally ask, like, when are you serving the cheese? Because I can sell you the same cheese today if you're going to serve it tonight versus if you're going to serve it in 2 weeks. I'm doing that with Thanksgiving coming up, right? Because it kind of falls on a weird day for me. So people are going to buy from me this weekend. So I'm going to sell them things that I know are going to be ripe and gorgeous. It's like you have that pear on your counter and you're waiting for it to be perfect. Cheese ripens. It has a lifespan. Yeah. Yes. Did you have a question? Just waving at me with your fork. Sorry, my mistake. Well, let's take a bite into that gorgeous yellow bottom left piece if you've not already. This is called Dutch Farmstead. This is our raw milk cheese for the evening. It is an unpasteurized cow's milk cheese made by Cato Corner Farm, which is in Colchester, Connecticut. They are the creme de la creme of American cheesemakers. They are highly regarded in the cheesemaking community globally. They raise predominantly Jersey cows, which are really high producing cows, great for butter making, great for cheese making. There's a lot of fat in their milk, so that means less waste for farmers. And they are grass fed. The cows are out on pasture for most of the year. And they're the really sweet brown kind of taupey cows with big ears and they look like little deer. They're so sweet. This is a farm you can definitely go visit too if you're up for a drive. It's like an hour. It's in the middle of the state. But so beautiful. And Dutch Farmstead is a Dutch inspired recipe. The cheesemaker Liz studied and developed this recipe while she was in Europe. It definitely reminds me of some young Goudas. It has some of those characteristics. It's not super hard and aged and crystally and sweet, but it's like the most beautiful, soft paste. This is a great melting cheese. This is in the semi-firm category, and anything in this category that has like a little pliability to the paste. And it's sort of firm enough to cut it with a knife, but then gets really soft and smooth. And when it warms up in your mouth, tends to be a great melting cheese. If you come into the shop looking for something for mac and cheese, this is probably going to be on my list of great options. Raw milk cheeses are harder to find in the States. We have a fear of unpasteurized milk. We have a fear of pathogens in our food. And so pasteurization was developed as a way to manage the spread of pathogens, very harmful and potentially, deadly pathogens. So it's definitely served a very important purpose when it was developed. Nowadays, we have a much better understanding of how cultures and bacteria exists in milk. Milk is kind of magical in that it wants to be healthy. It has an acidity that creates sort of an inhospitable environment for some really harmful pathogens like listeria and things like that. And those sorts of contaminants usually happen when milk is being transported from one place to another. So if you're finding a farmstead cheese that's raw milk, you really know that like the chain of supply is pretty short, going from the barn to the milking parlor to the make room. And that eliminates possibility for risks associated with raw milk products. You can buy raw milk in Connecticut. You can find farms that sell raw milk. The benefits are it's nutritionally has a lot of trace minerals and vitamins that you may not get from homogenized pasteurized milk. And in cheese making, it creates, I think, just like a much richer flavor. This cheese is going to hang out in your mouth. This is going to linger with you. You can have like a really yummy smoked Gouda at a party or a cheddar or something, and it's kind of short, like a sort of, you eat it and it's yummy and then it's gone. This lingers. So this has like a depth of flavor that really stays with you. And I really attribute that to the raw milk. It's a little more unexpected and chaotic. Every wheel I get of this cheese is different. It's not a consistent product. It's always gorgeous. It's always delicious, but sometimes the notes are a little bit different than others. And that I really like the chaos of that, but it makes it hard for small cheesemakers sometimes to sell to big grocery stores because you don't have an educated person explaining the cheese every single time a piece goes out. So we strive for, consistency and replicable sort of outcomes. But that's why I love raw milk cheeses too. They're a little wild. So I categorize this as a semi-firm cheese, semi-firm and firm. Picture like between this and then maybe like a harder cheese like pecorino, or even like a Gruyere. Like a Gruyere might be a firm cheese, and then a pecorino or a Parmigiano, you get into like the hard category where you're really like, good for grating, good for cooking with. But I think this is definitely a very special one, and it's another Connecticut cheese. So I'm always happy to show that off. This is sort of stylistically, I think, what a lot of us are familiar with. If you go to the grocery store, you can look at something like this and say, oh, that's familiar to me. I know I like cheddar. When folks come in and say I like cheddar, I give them a taste of this. You may not have looked at Dutch Farmstead on the sheet and said, oh, that sounds yummy, but it's semi-firm, it's milky, it's mild, it's a little grassy, and has that nice complexity of flavor that really lingers. Great this for a French onion soup. This is killer on a French onion soup. Yeah, really good for cooking or awesome on its own. Pairs really nicely with wines. Keep looking at you when I'm talking about pairings now, but you jog my memory. Um, yeah. Right, we have one more cheese left. Yes. Mm. I do choose a red with this cheese. That's my first instinct. It has a fruity character that I think is nice with like an Italian, but I like the like Italian wines or fruitier wines, kind of rich, bold flavors. I also, because of the style of this cheese, depending on the time of year, could see you doing like a cold Spanish white or something fun too. Like there's definitely potential for that. But this is sort of the creamier cheeses are very mouth coating. You may have experienced that with the first couple of pairings where like they really stay in your mouth, they coat your palate. And that I usually like something kind of full bodied and yeah, that's nice. Yeah. Um, when making a cheese board, if you're going to put together a spread for folks coming over, I typically recommend a soft, a hard, and a blue. That's like a really nice way to start, unless you know your crowd is not a blue fan, and then we can sub something else in. But starting out with that idea of like something soft, something hard or firm, and something blue is a nice way of thinking of, if you're having people over, that's usually like the crowd pleasers. And that's how I do my platters at the shop. And that's like my sort of basis for starting there. Then the like 2.0 level is to think about milk type. So maybe you do a goat's milk brie, like the Lake's Edge that we tried. Like, wow, that really was surprisingly delicious. Let's do the Lake's Edge. So that's a goat. And then we'll do the Dutch farmstead, which is cow's milk and a different style. And then you can mix in a different style, like a blue or a different milk type with something else at the end. So let's taste our blue. We're going back to High Lawn Farm. I didn't really talk about High Lawn. Sorry, the Crema Alpina and the High Lawn Blue both come from High Lawn Farm, which is in Lee, Massachusetts. So just over the border through Great Barrington in Mass is High Lawn Farm. They're also a farmstead dairy. They raise Jersey cows like Cato. You can visit. They make ice cream. I highly recommend the trek if you're ever up in the Berkshires. It's beautiful. And this is their flagship blue cheese, High Lawn Blue. It's gorgonzola-y. It's melts in your mouth. This particular wheel, y'all are lucky. I brought a good, every wheel is different. And this is like rocking, perfectly ripe, firm enough to pick up and crumble, but like butter melts in your mouth. I categorize this as being a little more acidic. Like it hits you back here. I always go like this when I'm describing this cheese. It hits you right here. Kind of sharp and tangy. I get notes of like anise and like really rich sort of herbal flavors in this cheese. And it's a grass-fed blue cheese and can have a little of that kind of Barney character as well. Again, talking about the maybe seemingly less desirable tasting notes. Barn, hay, horse blanket is one of my favorite tasting notes because it paints a picture, right? It's something very visceral. But it's these like Barney kind of characteristics. Yeah. Yeah, like a creme piccata or something like really soft. Isn't that killer? Yeah. So this is one of those really nice funky blues. And in the style, of course, blue. Um, and yeah, what do we think of the Highland blue? That's good. Yes. Yes. I remember hearing a story when I was young, like on the radio, about someone from Haagen-Dazs talking about like not warming in the microwave, but like letting your ice cream sort of come to temperature. And I thought that was really interesting. And essentially the science behind that is that fat is more flavorful at room temperature or a little bit warmer. So ice cream cold from the freezer, it kind of burns your tongue and you don't get like a lot of flavor out of it. And then as you get to the end of the bowl and it's a little more melty, there's more flavor to it. So cheese is the same way. Cheese is high fat, creamy, satiating, nutritious. So I recommend if you're making a cheese board, I say like an hour. Stuff can sit out for an hour, no problem. If you're having people and you're putting together something, let it sit out. I was here maybe like half an hour, 40 minutes before you guys got here and left things out. And nothing's going to go bad in that amount of time. Nothing's going to go bad in 2 hours. So letting things get up to room temperature at least is usually what's recommended. And I would agree with that. You get more flavor out of it. Yes. Ooh. I said before like a cracker with like nuts in it, like or a fruit rather. Like I like a fruited cracker. I carry something called they're called, oh gosh, they're from Maine, Maine Crisps. And I see them around. They're a small woman-owned company in Maine, but they have a nice reach. I bet they have Carolisi's might carry it. But they are like a buckwheat crackers. They happen to be gluten-free. They're really thin and crispy. I can fill up on crackers when I'm really here to focus on the cheese. So I like those because they're thin and crispy. They're hearty enough you can kind of dip with them. And they have like, I think I have like an almond and fig one. They have like a za'atar and olive one that's a little more savory. Yeah, Maine crisps. What are they called? Yeah. Yes, that's obviously it's my favorite. Yeah, I like that a lot. I also often go for like a Norwegian like crisp bread. That's like all seeds. I like a seeded cracker. Those are yummy. I like that with cheese. Something that doesn't dominate. Something salty and crispy. Yeah. Yep. Ooh. Ah. There's my first thought is that there's sticker shock when people come in because I price everything by the pound. Artisan cheese is intimidating because it has a high price tag often. Like, my in my cheese case things range from like $12 a pound to I don't have anything $50 a pound yet, but like $47 a pound. And that's intimidating for sure, especially when you go to the store and Land O'Lakes is on sale for $3.99 a pound. But a pound of cheese is a lot of cheese. So that's I'd say like a common misconception is most folks need, I mean, most of the cuts I cut for sale this evening are like a third of a pound. And some cheese shops have like a cut minimum where like they'll only cut you a quarter pound or more. I don't care. If you want to, I call them bookmarks. If you want a little bookmark piece of cheese to take home and enjoy on a burger or have it, I'm always happy to do that. So I think that's maybe one misconception is that it's artisan cheeses are inaccessibly expensive. And I'm happy to, be able to have people come and taste, try before they buy. And usually I'm always happy to work within a budget. And once folks have tried it, they're like, oh, okay, yeah. It's a little yeah, you get a little assurance that you're going to go home with something good if you're going to spend some nice money on it. But honestly, I'm always surprised when people, buy a nice number of things and I can tell that they're conscious of budget and they're putting something together and we get to the register and I say, here's your total. They go, that's it? Like 9 times out of 10. That's it? And I think that's great because you get what you need. You're not the other answer to the cheese storage question is buy what you need, right? Because then things aren't going to waste. You're eating them the day or the next day or within that week, and then you're getting the most out of it. Yeah. Yeah, you have to buy a half a pound or whatever. And if you live alone or if or if your husband eats cheese. Yes, exactly. Did I see a hand? Yes. Mm. Yeah. For uh texture, I would say is gonna be what changes the most. So for example, if you have a really runny brie, even like the crema alpina, once you had the chance to taste it, it was pretty soft and gooey and runny. If that sat out for 3 or 4 or 5 hours, when you put it back in the fridge, it's sort of gonna like seize up a little bit and set. It's not gonna be the tastiest, but maybe you throw it in an omelet the next morning or something like that. Not gonna go bad. Very few things. Fresh cheeses like ricotta or chèvre, maybe I'd say ditch it. But any aged cheese, any cheese with a rind, you're probably going to be fine with. If you have something, for example, like the Dutch, or like a cheddar or like a Gouda, that's going to sweat. You're going to notice that like the oil and the moisture sort of come out of it. If you're, it's the end of the party, you've been drinking, you're going to bed, and you feel like you have the wherewithal to like dab it with a paper towel, take a little of that grease off, wrap it, fine. Yeah. Yeah. Let me glance at my sheet and see if there's anything I overlooked. Um, yeah. Yes. Yes. This week I this week I lived out my dream and I put out a bowl of Halloween candy and lactate tablets, people were dying. It was so funny. I was like, I think I'm hilarious. But I put it in a little candy dish for April Fool's Day. Yes, so younger cheeses have higher levels of lactose. Fresh milk, high levels of lactose. Ricotta, high levels of lactose. Ice cream, anything really fresh and creamy. Cheeses under the lactose in cheese undergoes like chemical changes as a cheese ages. Parmigiano Reggiano has negligible amounts of lactose. So a hard aged cheese, most folks who have lactose sensitivity, not necessarily milk or dairy sensitivity, but lactose specifically, may have an easier time digesting. I'm a cheesemonger, not a doctor. That's always my caveat. But yes, that's what I know to be true. And then between cow, sheep, and goat milk has lower levels of lactose. It's not crazy. People come in and they're like, I can't eat anything but goat. It's again like pretty close, but cow's milk does tend to be higher in lactose. Lactose is a sugar, it's a milk sugar. So if you tasted cheese and like literally sweeter cheeses, fresh, like that ricotta you said tastes like ice cream, like that's lactose. Yum. Hopefully no one has a tummy ache later. But yeah, the more aged the cheese get, lactose literally breaks down. And isn't as problematic for folks. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Salt is also a really good question I often get. Similar answer in that salt changes. Pretty much all cheese contains salt. It's a really useful preservative, right? Any preserved product has salt in it. Cured meats, tinned fishes. But this is something I need to do a little more research on, but in my understanding, again, the kind of more aged cheeses, that salt breaks down, where it's not as like a feta, you really can tell, like, wow, that's salty. It's in a salt brine. You're getting salt right up the jump. I think like sodium level wise, something in the semi-firm category, like the Dutch Farmstead or maybe like a Gruyere, like that feels logical to me that the salt is an important part of the cheese making, but is not going to be like in super high levels per serving. But I honestly, that is something that like I want to understand more because people do ask me about salt and cheese because it's part of it. Yeah. Cool. I brought cheese to sell. I have everything that we tasted today. I put information on the bottom about my shop hours. We're open a couple extra days for Thanksgiving. So if you have time off, come visit us on a Tuesday and Wednesday. We're going to do a soup and sandwich special. Tom kindly referenced at the beginning, my husband is a cheesemonger, or rather a fishmonger. And our shop is together. So we have one store, same address, 900 Main Street in Watertown, and we have fresh seafood as well as local cheeses. So we're a destination. We got a lot going on. Yes. From here, I jumped on 84 and it was like 40 minutes in the dark and the rain. So yeah, it's not terrible. Go towards Waterbury and then I'm like the first exit off towards on like Route 8. Yeah. Yes. Or go through Middlebury. Yeah. Did you have a question? Yeah. Yes. Prepared foods. Not as much. I try to sort of market us as like a grocer. Like that's really, we predominantly deal in raw shellfish and fish and cut to order cheeses. Zach, my husband, does poke bowls weekly. So that's like fresh raw sushi fish over rice and toppings. That's always available. And then I have a friend that's a baker that we get baguettes from sort of sporadically, but more in the wintertime, we're doing soups and chowders and that sort of thing. So if you're on Facebook and Instagram, that's a really good way to keep up with us and what we're offering. Usually it's weekend days. We're open Thursdays through Mondays, so closed midweek. But yes. Yes, yep. Always tuna, always salmon. Our scallops are sushi grade. We eat those raw. We have bay scallops in right now. They're like little sugar cubes from Nantucket. They're so good. Yeah. Give us a ring. My information's on there. And make sure to come grab a card from me too. Actually, why don't I just pass it out? You don't have to worry about finding me. Take and pass if you don't mind. But... Yes. What would you pair? I have a goal of making a calendar of like 12 fish and cheese recipes because people say they don't go together. Lobster mac and cheese, clams casino, a tuna melt, the Filet-O-Fish sandwich from McDonald's has a piece of cheese on it. Bagels and lox. Yeah, there's some funny, it's a little shoehorny, but there's definitely, I mean, it's surprising. Yeah, dairy and fish can coexist. We got married in August, so we'll see if it lasts. But for now, it's it's the pairing is working. Well, thank you all so much. Please make sure to come chat with me. And enjoy your holiday.